Hey class, today we're going to talk about completing the square, which is found in section 4-6, part 2 of your book. Our objectives are to solve equations by completing the square and to rewrite functions by completing the square. You can see here that it says completing the square. It says you can form a perfect square trinomial from x squared plus bx by adding b over 2 squared. All right, so in example 4, we are asked to find the value that completes the square for the following expression. Okay, so if you remember, completing the square is, is b over 2 squared. So if you can remember, this is somewhat in standard form, except we're missing our c value. So b is actually negative 10 over 2, and then we need to square that value. So negative 10 over 2 is negative 5, and then negative 5 squared is positive 25. And that is all we need to do for this example. Okay? So after finding the value that would complete the square, we would then substitute back into the equation. So we have x squared minus 10x plus 25. Okay? And remember, for something to be a perfect square, we would take the square root of the first, take the square root of the second. Square root of x squared is x, square root of 5 is 5, and then we check the center to see if it's 2 times the first and the last term. So 2 times x times 5. Does that give us negative 10x? No, it doesn't. So it's a negative 2. It's not negative 2, it's negative 5. Okay, so then our perfect square here as a final answer is x minus 5 squared. All right, let's try that again with the next one. All right, in try 4, it says what value completes the square for the following expression? So again, it's b over 2 and then squared. So b over 2 squared. In this case, our b is 6 over 2, and then we need to square that answer. So 6 over 2 is 3. And 3 squared is 9. So that's what's going to complete our square. So let's do that. X squared plus 6x plus 9. Remember, for it to be a perfect square, we need to take the square root of x squared, which is x, take the square root of 9, which is 3, and the center should be 2 times the first term and the last term. And that is correct. It is going to be 6x. So our final answer is going to be x plus 3 squared. Okay, in our key concept, we are trying to solve an equation by completing the square. For the most part, we kind of just did this, except we were given our c term. Now, in the future, when we're not given our c term, we have to rewrite a few things to be able to solve by completing the square. So I'm going to give you a second just to kind of read over that. All right, so in example 5, it says, what is the solution of the following expression? We have 3x squared minus 12x plus 6 equal to 0. Okay, so the very first thing we need to do is rewrite it in the form of x squared plus bx equal to c. Okay, so we need to move the c term over. So to move the c term over, we're going to subtract 6. So we're left with 3x squared minus 12x equal to negative 6. Okay, after that, again, we're trying to get it into x squared format. So right now we have a 3, so we need to get rid of that 3 by dividing. So we need to divide by 3 to every term. And that will leave us with x squared minus 4x equal to negative 2. All right, the very next thing that we need to do is identify our b. So in other words, we're doing that whole completing the square part again. So remember, that was b over 2 squared. b is negative 4 over 2, and I need to square that answer. So that's going to give us negative 2 squared, which is 4. Now with that 4, I'm going to add 4 to both the left side and the right side. So let's do that. If I add 4 here and I add 4 here, that will give us x squared minus 4x plus 4 equal to 2. And so on the left hand side at this point, now we need to complete the square. So let's check. If I take the square root of the first term, I'll get x. If I take the square root of the last term, it's 2. And so in the center, it should be 2 times the first term times the last term But in that case, it gives us 4x instead of negative 4x. So we need to make that last 2 a negative. So when I rewrite this, and I'm running out of space, I'm going to write on the side, I will have x minus 2 squared equal to our final term, which was 2. All right, at this point, it becomes a simple equation with dealing with square roots and squares. So the opposite of squaring is square root, so I'm going to square root both sides. And so I will be left with x minus 2 equaling plus or minus the square root of 2. And then the very last thing I need to do is add 2 to both sides. So our final answer will be x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 2. And I know that was a very lengthy process, so let's go back through it one more time. So again, the very first thing we want to do is get it into the x squared plus bx plus c format, which was the very first thing we did. So we subtracted 6 on both sides. After that, we need to be sure that we got a single x, so we divide everything by 3. Next, we needed to go through the completing the square process, which was b over 2 squared. Once we found what that value was, which was 4, we added it to both sides. And so that left us with x squared minus 4x plus 4 equal to 2. We then tested to be sure that it was a perfect square, and we realized that it was going to be a perfect square. So then we were able to write it as x minus 2 squared equal to 2. And then from there we just solved for x. So let's try this again with the next example. Alright, so again, we need to first get this into x squared plus bx equals c form. The deal is c is not the only thing on the right hand side, meaning 9 is not the only thing on the right hand side, so we need to subtract x on both sides. So we're left with 2x squared minus 2x plus 3 equal to 9. And again, that's still not in that correct form because we need to move the 3 over. So I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. And I'm left with 2x squared minus 2x equal to 6. Now again, from here, we need a single x, so I need to divide both sides or everything by 2. And I'm left with x squared minus x equals 3. All right, from here, we need to complete the squares. So remember, that's b over 2 squared. b is negative 1 over 2, and that's squared. So that becomes negative 1/4. Or, nope, it doesn't. It's positive 1/4. Okay, so now we're going to add 1/4 to both sides. So that will give us x squared minus x plus 1/4 equal to 3 1/4. Okay, and then from there we will take the square root. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 1/4 is 1/2. And if we check the center, it'd be 2 times x times 1/2. And in this case, that would give us positive 1x, and that's not the case. We actually have a negative x, so that means that the 1/2 needs to be negative. So when I rewrite this as a perfect square, I would have x minus 1/2 squared equal to 3 1/4. Next, I need to take the square root of both sides, so I'm left with x minus 1/2 equal to 3 1/4. Or the square root of that, sorry. And technically it should be plus or minus the square root of that. So let me get rid of this equal sign. Okay, and then last I need to add 1/2 to both sides. So x will equal 1/2 plus or minus the square root of 3 1/4. And that will be it for now. Remember guys, if you need any help, please come see me for tutoring. Otherwise, that's the end of our lesson.